What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will pull from every resource available to do a complete breakdown of the MC30C. It's presumably at least one of 3 in the MC80 line, but this is the only one we're aware of, and it starts off the glorious list of MC ships from our favorite fish folks, with 15 models in total, some being among the most famous ships in the galaxy. It was considered a specialized high-speed attack frigate, and one of the most powerful mid-level frigates to ever see combat. And though we don't get any specific stats on speed like megalight, acceleration, or atmospheric speed, this may sound crazy, but I think it's at least around 1200 kilometers per hour, which would be tied with a TIE fighter, as some resources have the Nebulon B escort frigate hitting that speed in atmosphere. And this would make sense for it being called the high-speed attack frigate, because at first I was thinking maybe it was around 1000 kilometers per hour, but that would only just barely be quicker than the ISD, and wouldn't really warrant this special reputation. It's gotta be around 1200, so have fun picturing this thing zipping around like a TIE. This combined with the armament is what made it so special, with 2 forward-mounted heavy proton torpedo launchers, 16 turret-mounted medium turbolasers, 16 twin medium laser cannons, and 6 cluster bomb launchers. I've talked about why the ISD didn't want to necessarily disintegrate their opponents, mostly because capturing people and comms intact is more valuable for an empire. But there were no torpedo launchers on the ISD, and even the Venator at wartime had 4 normal proton torpedo tubes in total. So the actual explosive payload that could be delivered is far greater on this much smaller ship. The 16 turbolasers and medium lasers are incredible as well. Probably no point defense because this thing was built for hit and run and is faster than most bombers, most starfighters in general actually. And while the 6 cluster bomb launchers allow it to simultaneously play a protective anti-starfighter role, either creating a wall or lane for itself to get through the battle and hit the target, or protecting other ships in the fleet. It's a really useful weapon and it's sadly very rare. And they are perfectly distributed around the ship, with everything being split equally across the port, starboard, bow, and aft, giving the cluster bomb launcher the ability to fire at pursuing craft. Again, everything's just synergized for that hit and run role. All of this packed into the size of only 380 meters or 1,246 feet, making it about twice the length of a Walmart supercenter, more than 3 Y-wings longer than the Nebulon B, and almost exactly a third of the Venator. The Class 1 hyperdrive matches its reputation for quick speed and is the fastest you get without custom ships like Slave 1 and the Falcon. While all this only required a crew of 820 while transporting 95 soldiers and storage for 2 years worth of consumables, which is a lot of walk jerk. Now the major drawback is that it had exceptionally light armor, and some are confused by the remark by the New Republic pilot Captain Nanth Tanzit, who claimed that they could duke it out with Star Destroyers. But this is likely due to its speed and ability to take out some of the ISD's own weapons, with the MC30's powerful barrages, but also the state-of-the-art Mon Cala defense shield, which probably works something like the MC80s that had triple layer shields, where the whole idea is that if this outer layer was defeated, the second layer would hold off the attack long enough for that outermost layer to regenerate. If this was disabled abruptly by the sheer volume of fire or specialized ion weaponry, then it was turned into space debris in just a few seconds. This is why they all operated on a tight timeline for attack runs, or when in transit they were always part of a larger fleet, and used the cluster bombs to break contact and ensure that they were never taking too much fire at once. When their fleet was in space combat, it would use its turbolasers from long range before closing into medium range to unleash its proton torpedo launchers. And while this strategy carried risks, it would reinforce its forward shields to guard against counterattacks, simultaneously deploying cluster bombs and targeting starfighters with precise bursts from its laser cannons. When faced with bomber threats, the frigate adopted a defensive approach, maintaining balanced shield coverage over the entirety of the ship, and using coordinated laser fire in groups of 3 to 5 to effectively neutralize the attackers. Now all of this only cost 9,500,000 credits, which scales with most other frigates, but for all this weaponry, speed, and shields, it's a great deal, and it's about 1/5 the cost of a Venator. Following the invasion of Mon Cala and the escape of the Mon Calamari Exodus fleet, additional city ships from Mon Cala managed to flee during the aftermath of the initial assault. Among these were several MC30C frigates, which were retrofitted for combat and integrated into the Alliance to restore the Republic's naval forces. These frigates became a core component of the central fleets used by the Alliance in its struggle against the Empire. And during the Battle of Zorn, 2 of them played a pivotal role as part of the Allied Armada. This occurred in the later stages of the Galactic Civil War, and pitted an Imperial naval task force against an Allied coalition comprising Rebel Alliance forces, Old Mandalorians, and residents of Foundry 4. As reinforcements, the Allied Armada had 2 MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruisers, at least 1 MC30C frigate, a GR-75 medium transport, 5 other starships, and 6 fighter wings. And with all this firepower, they were able to secure a victory at Zorn. We don't get much details on them escorting this Pelta class, and one of them was attacked by Onyx Squadron and their TIE defenders. The 30C would remain a component of the New Republic's fleet during the ongoing conflicts after the Battle of Endor. At least one of them took part in the Battle of Jakku, which can be seen as the final engagement of the Galactic Civil War, and the official end of the Empire. Assign a specific role, likely that of a sort of capital ship assassin, or maybe for using the cluster bombs to clear out starfighters, as there were always seemingly endless waves of TIEs. It was engulfed in serpent-like blue flames as swarms of TIE fighters darted around its hull above Jakku's surface. Alphabet Squadron's Captain Nanth Tansit witnessed those flames, but was unaware of the MC30C's exact mission. He speculated that the reactor core had been compromised, and moments later the frigate erupted in a brilliant explosion, shining like a supernova and releasing a massive shockwave that churned the waves of fiery gas throughout the battlefield. TIE fighters in the vicinity rode the shockwave and redirected their focus to engage Tansit and his forces. It's a really cool example of the lore of the weaker hull playing out in a narrative just how the obscure lore described. But despite the loss of this frigate, the Battle of Jakku was a decisive New Republic victory, culminating in the Empire's surrender and the signing of the Galactic Concordance. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, it made its first appearance in Star Wars canon through the 2016 supplement book Friends Like These for the Star Wars role-playing game. But it was just the image of the ship. It would only be officially named in 2020 in Starships and Speeders, though it originates from concept art from Joe Johnston for the Mon Cala Rebel Cruiser, drawn up for Return of the Jedi. And those designs would eventually be used in the 1997 game Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, and gets officially named in Forces of Corruption, the expansion for Empire at War, released in 2006. It's just fascinating that such an obscure ship had such an impact. In 2023, Benjamin Last confirmed that the MC30C frigate in its concept art influenced the design of the Defender-class cruiser, which was seen in the live-action Ahsoka show. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions or future video. Comment your thoughts and suggestions. Subscribe to see more and check out these videos. I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, you can't go wrong with a Mon Cala ship, and the Force will be with you. Always. You can always count on the Fishfolk engineers. What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is going to be a complete breakdown of the obscure but incredible MC40A light cruiser. We'll cover all of its stats, do some comparisons, and learn its history. So let's dive in. It was manufactured by Mon Calamari Shipyards, the same creator of all the Mon Cala ships with the MC title, but also things like the Viscount and starfighters like the Amphisub. At a length of 600 meters or 1,969 feet, it was the same size as an Interdictor-class cruiser, and about half the size of a Venator. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be nearly twice the length of a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, or twice the height of the Eiffel Tower. Its armament was impressive, with 14 turret-mounted medium turbolasers, 7 on each side, 2 forward-mounted concussion missile launchers, with a total payload of 50 missiles on board. The medium ion cannons numbered 18, with 4 on each side and 5 each at the forward and aft. And finally 6 heavy tractor beam projectors, 2 on each side, and then 1 forward and 1 in the aft. This is a great combination of weaponry, and I really like how it's specialized for their naval tactics, not just purely offense. It has more ion cannons than turbolasers, and went with the heavy tractor beam projectors. Both decisions are incredibly rare on any capital ship, and show that the captain would likely open up with volleys of ion cannon, disabling the enemy ship's engines and shields, use those heavy tractor beams to push around or lock in place Imperial ships that might be more than twice its size, all while blasting away with the turbolasers until the enemy was finally in position to be completely destroyed by those concussion missiles. Its portside hangar also had room for a squadron of starfighters, which usually meant 12 units, and as we can see, it would often employ Y-wings. This too is a great pairing, releasing those bombers after your ion cannons took out the enemy shields. All this makes for a really nasty surprise for any Imperial that might overlook this simple-seeming craft. And we can't ignore its speed. In hyperspace, it was faster than an Imperial Star Destroyer, with a Class 1 hyperdrive and backup Class 15. That means a ship like this could be across the galaxy with the speed of top starfighters. And its megalight speed, or how fast it travels through space, was faster than the MC80, but still slower than most Imperial craft. To compensate for this, they had those beautiful Mon Calamari-made shield generators, which are able to absorb incredible amounts of turbolaser fire, something that would screw up the tactics and timing relied on by Imperial captains, giving this relatively obscure ship an element of surprise, as its focus on those tractor beams, ions, and missiles, with this effectively larger HP, allowed it to really cause some havoc in Imperial fleets. It did take an enormous crew of 3,770, but this doesn't include a battalion of 650 soldiers. It also had consumables on board to last all of these people 2 years, and would only cost 15.5 million credits. That's about 1/10 the cost of an ISD, and about 1/7 the MC80. So really a lot of bang for your buck. Or calamari flan, whatever you're paying with. As for its history, these ships would escape Mon Cala after the Imperial invasion, being a part of what is called the Mon Calamari Exodus fleet. Shipyards would be set up in space, and we see the rebellion took full advantage of all of this ship's features. The MC40A would often act as the anchor of smaller rebel attacks on larger Imperial fleets. Its shield allowed it to act like a blockade buster in some locations, and there are specific reports of how it would use those tractor beams to lock an enemy in place and then maneuver towards their aft, away from all those powerful forward-facing guns, and lay those rockets into the area just forward of the engine arrays on Star Destroyers, the area containing the main reactor, among many other crucial ship functions. It also served with Rebel Special Operations groups, its beefy shields absorbing and drawing the most Imperial fire, while the hangar could be outfitted with different craft to best serve the mission purpose. Basically, you would move your enemy into a better spot with the tractors, throw the whole enemy crew into chaos as the ion charges made all their systems go haywire, perfect for setting them up for infiltration and extraction by Rebel Spec Ops. This combo wasn't restricted to just ship-to-ship missions, but all those traits were used by Rebels to attack space stations and even planetary targets, with those ion cannons being able to knock out some city-sized shield generators. While its Class 1 hyperdrive meant that at a moment's notice it could quickly respond to new Rebel intelligence reports, things like the transport of some VIP or window to attack, and then be on the other side of the galaxy with the same speed as a starfighter through hyperspace. But it was also used to protect the Rebellion's crucial assets and VIPs. If somehow the MC40A was the recipient of an ambush by Imperial Spec Ops, this shield, tractor, ion combo worked to break away from the combat and make some distance, maybe use the ion bolts to knock out the Imp's hold on you, and safely make your way through hyperspace to fight another day. It is said to have been used up past the Battle of Hoth and Endor, even fighting off the Yuuzhan Vong. So I hope you can see why I think it's a shame that we see so little of this ship, but at least we see that it retained all of its awesomeness in canon. Maybe you'll see it in some future show, but right now it's only appeared in canon in the books Starships and Speeders, and that's where a lot of these stats were retained, being previously laid out in the book Strongholds of Resistance, and making appearances in the Star Wars X-Wing and TIE Fighter games, as well as the comic Legacy War Issue 5. The only thing that really changed was that in Legends its shields were relatively normal, a 1696 SBD rating, which is on par with something this size. But in canon, while not given a number, it states that it had exceptionally strong deflector shields, which allowed it to slug it out with much larger ships. So that's it for the MC40A light cruiser. Be sure to comment your thoughts on this ship. Do you think it fits a good role, or would you just go with some of the larger MC ships? But most important of all, remember, Mon Cala engineering plus Rebel hit-and-run tactics are the stuff Imperial nightmares are made of. And the Force will be with you, always.
This is Admiral Radish of the Rebel Alliance. All squadron leaders report in.
What's up, MetaNerdz? In this video, we'll pull from every resource to understand all 4 variants of what is one of the most impressive ships in the MC series. You'll see why the MC75 Star Cruiser earned its price tag of 88 million credits, which is more than half an ISD and 1.5 times the Venator. Its length of 1,204.44 meters, or 3,951 feet and 7 inches. Yes, this is one of those rare times where we get such specific details. It makes it about 2 Falcons longer than the Venator, and about 75% of the ISD, while its height of 435.56 meters, or 1,429 feet, is about the same as 19 AT-ATs, or nearly twice the height of the Venator. It seems like the original atmospheric speed was 650 kilometers per hour, or 403 miles per hour. But that is half the Nebulon B frigate and about 65% of the ISD in Venator. Though with its refits, it gets equipped with 12 Kuat drive yards Guimond 15 sublight ion drives. These sublight engines were housed beneath the engineering section, concealed within the heat-dissipating structure of the ship's design, and modified to enable the massive ship to maintain a cruising speed comparable to that of its starfighter escorts, which should be around 1,000 kilometers per hour. and so on par with the Star Destroyers. The reason behind these refits starts in 18 BBY, when the Galactic Empire seized control of the oceanic planet Mon Cala. The native Mon Calamari initiated a large-scale exodus, departing their homeworld aboard many of their vast city ships. Among these, the MC75 became the first of their city ships to be retrofitted for military purposes. Originally, they served as passenger liners, civilian transports, and civic government buildings. One notable example, the Profundity, originally functioned as the Civic Governance Tower in Nystillum, before being repurposed as a warship by the Rebellion in their deep space facilities. These conversions marked a turning point, as the MC-75s are part of the first wave of vessels to flee Mon Cala, with additional waves of starships escaping later. And that Star Cruiser name comes from the original civilian role, which is true of most of the MC series. During the war, they became the first true command ships of the Alliance fleet. But with only a limited number in service at any given time, these vessels were frequently assigned to the command of Alliance admirals. Rarely operating independently, they were typically accompanied by a fleet of a dozen or more support ships. In combat, they equipped long-range tactics, using their turbolasers in coordinated groups of 2 to 3 to engage enemy warships. When the situation demanded, they could maneuver between ships to deliver devastating broadsides. For engagements requiring greater firepower, they closed to medium range to deploy their ion cannons. Crews were tasked with dynamically adjusting the ship's shield coverage to reinforce whatever side faced the heaviest fire. Against smaller warships and starfighters, the MC-75s relied on their laser cannons and torpedoes, also fired in coordinated groups of 2 or 3. That crew's size was 3,225, which is less than half the Venator, while also having the space to move 1,000 passengers or ground troops, while having 2 years' worth of consumables for all those people if need be, which would be about 25,000 packs of Rhodian ramen for literally 3 square meals a day. Its Class 1 hyperdrive made it faster than most of the other Rebel and Imperial ships, but was normal for the fish folk and seen in some Republic capital ships. This upgrade transformed the cruiser into a battleship-class vessel, complete with a weapon collar designed to house primary weapons and shield generators. Enhanced shielding was installed on both the fore and aft sections of the superstructure, with the heavily armored forward hull making its concealed deflector shield generators largely redundant. But a deflector shield emitter array was added at the aft for additional protection. And of course, it had an impressive arsenal, with 20 point defense laser cannons, 12 broadside turbolasers, 4 heavy ion cannons, 12 proton torpedo launchers, and 6 tractor beam projectors hidden within a port located forward of the weapon's collar. This formidable array of weaponry enabled the MC-75 to effectively engage the larger warships of the Imperial Navy. Heavy ion cannons are rare on their own, and when combined with 12 proton torpedoes, that is 3 times more than the Venator, and none were found on the ISD, it all makes for a perfect combo to take out shields as quick as possible and deliver the greatest amount of damage before those shields were restored. While the tractor beams mean you could easily capture a target, as you don't have to completely unload your arsenal on the ion-disabled enemy, but use some torpedoes to destroy the engines, shield generators, or ship reactor, and then open up comms to encourage the enemy to make the smart choice and surrender. An armored outrigger fin on the ventral hull housed the command bridge pod and receiver array, positioned opposite a dorsal mast equipped with a communications transmission system and sensor cluster. These blade-like fins, along with the vessel's sleek, tapered profile, were deliberately designed to evoke the primal fear of a predatory fish among the aquatic Mon Calamari. While just behind that ventral outrigger fin was an ordnance pod. The city ship's former civic atrium was repurposed into a docking bay and starship service area. The ship was managed by a hangar traffic control suite, protected by overlapping shields and magnetic containment fields, ensuring proper regulation of oxygen and pressure. And the docking bay was large enough to accommodate vessels up to corvette size, making it a versatile hub for starship operations, which normally included 36 starfighters, which were mission-specific and changed frequently, but would see everything from B and U wings to the A, X, and Y trio, while this space could also be attached to large corvettes like the CR-90. The Ordnance version is basically the same, but with an exponential increase in the total number of proton torpedoes on board, dedicated to causing as much damage as possible, and like a massive gunboat, delivering more torpedoes per minute than several fleets of Venators could accomplish. And while I focused on the hit-and-run aspects of the MC30, although this 75 is not described that way, the fact that it could keep up with starfighter escorts, had a Class 1 hyperdrive, and this insane payload dump, I think this variant could be seen in a similar role, and of course pairing them all would be incredible. Snowballing this effect with precision strike craft stored in the hangar, with one of the Rebel fighters and bombers' ship advantages being that they all had hyperdrives, unlike most TIEs. and thus they could break off and escape into the blue void and then regroup if things went sideways, and you didn't necessarily have to make it back to the mothership for a successful hit and run. Of course, the supply chain issues of being rebels would limit the use of this strategy, but just the possibility of this happening had to ruin the sleep of many an Imperial. While the armored cruiser is a bit straightforward, just thicker hull plating throughout. In the MC30 vid, I also mentioned that once its shields were down, even basic weaponry would Swiss cheese through it effortlessly. But this beefy, up-armored MC75 made it so that even if those glorious Mon Cala shields somehow went down, it would still be able to battle on for a while without much worry. By 2 BBY, after Phoenix Cell secured a Quasar Fire class cruiser, the Talaris Rebel Star Docks transitioned into war production. These facilities began refitting the MC75, starting with the Profundity, along with the MC80 Home One type heavy star cruisers Home One and Nautilin. Colonel Ange Zavor documented the operations at the shipyards in the Talaris Cometry Cloud in a report to Commander-in-Chief Mon Mothma, which was later included in the Rebel files. By 1 BBY, the Profundity had become one of the Alliance fleet's first fully battle-ready capital ships. It served as the flagship of Admiral Radis, the former mayor of Nystulum, as well as the flagship of the entire Alliance fleet. When Rogue One disobeyed Alliance High Command and infiltrated Scarif to retrieve the Death Star plans, the Rebel Alliance ultimately decided to deploy its fleet in support, leading to the pivotal Battle of Scarif in the Galactic Civil War. Admiral Radis commanded the Alliance forces from the bridge of the Profundity and successfully received a transmission containing the stolen plans from the surface of Scarif.
Transmission received.
Admiral, we have the plans!
She did it!
But before the Profundity and its remaining Alliance ships could retreat, the Death Star and the Imperial flagship Devastator arrived. The ensuing conflict saw several Alliance ships destroyed, and the Profundity sustained heavy damage, rendering it incapable of escape. Imperial forces, led by Darth Vader, boarded the Profundity, resulting in the death of Admiral Radis and the massacre of the Rebel crew. Despite this, the Death Star plans were successfully transferred to the Tantive 4, which was docked in the hangar and managed to escape the battle. Following the loss of Admiral Radis in the Profundity, Admiral Ghleal Akbar assumed command of the remaining Alliance fleet elements, those which had not been deployed to Scarif. And in the lead up to the Battle of Yavin, he submitted a report to Mon Mothma detailing the defense of Yavin 4 and the grave threats posed by Imperial actions. In this report, Akbar acknowledges the profound loss of the Profundity, but affirmed that the fight continued with the Home One taking its place as the Alliance's flagship. That report too was included in the Rebel files. By this time, several additional MC-75 Star Cruisers had completed their retrofits and were deployed to support various Alliance operations. Following the mutiny of the Mon Cala mercantile fleet, at least 5 MC-75 Star Cruisers were stationed at the Mako Ta space docks, and they were involved in several skirmishes over the following months, with the MC-75 Aspiration receiving acclaim for its role in a battle where it inflicted significant damage on an Imperial Victory-class Star Destroyer. On the same day as the monumental Battle of Endor, the Temperance and Accordance participated in a conflict in the Hosnian system. Here, an Imperial armada attempted to strike at the core worlds. The battle concluded with an Alliance victory, though the Accordance was destroyed, but the Temperance managed to rescue its surviving crew. Following the Battle of Endor, the Alliance transitioned into the New Republic, and the MC-75 remained a key component of the New Republic defense fleet. Among them was that ship, the Temperance, assigned to New Republic General Hera Syndulla, after the destruction of her previous flagship, the Acclamator-class assault ship Lodestar, which was lost during the Cerberon system campaign. The Temperance played a crucial role in the Trioth operation, delivering bombardments on the Scar of Trioth. And around this time, the ship also served as the headquarters for Vanguard Squadron, tasked with defending the New Republic's Project Starhawk in the Bormia sector, which was the most unique vessel produced by the New Republic. In 34 ABY, after the Resistance recovered the Rebel files, both Akbar and Ushos annotated Zavor's original report to Mon Mothma regarding the Talaris Rebel Star Docks and the status of the Profundity. By 35 ABY, with the return of Darth Sidious, the Resistance joined forces with Lando Calrissian to lead a massive fleet. This fleet included dozens of MC-75 Star Cruisers and their sub-variants, including the B and C, participating in the climactic Battle of Exegol above the Sith world. After their victory, the celebrations commenced on Agent Kloss, with at least one MC-75 Star Cruiser seeing the ultimate victory out. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, supposedly there were 16,000 ship models used for the Galaxy fleet at the end of the sequel trilogy, and this resulted in countless variants of the ship, as they mashed up 3D model ship details. As much as that whole series was lackluster, and there is a lot of magic lost in not using real ship models in general, there's something to the fact that ending the series in this digital kit bashing of ships when physical kit bashes, or the combining of parts from model kits to make something new, was such a big part of the very first Star Wars ships and the entire original trilogy, to see that done even if digitally, there is something cool about that. If you want to read up more on the ship yourself, check out Rogue One, The Ultimate Visual Guide, of course the Rebel Files, and the Encyclopedia on Starfighters and Other Vehicles. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment your thoughts and suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, some fish get even more deadly when you take them out of water, and the Force will be with you. Always.
It's a trap!
What's up, MetaNerdz? This video will be a complete breakdown of the MC80 Home One type Star Cruiser. We'll be mentioning the actual Home One, but also, and this is somewhat confusing, but focusing on the actual line that it inspired. The MC80 Home One type Star Cruiser, produced by Mon Cala shipyards, was part of the MC80 Star Cruiser line, which has a ton of different other options. Originally built for deep space exploration, each Mon Cala vessel was unique in design and construction. These ships were later standardized during the conversion to warships through extensive refitting and hull modifications. The standard length for most ships was 1,200 meters, though some individual ships, like the Home One type Star Cruiser, measuring up to 1,400 meters or longer, while the Home One itself was 1,300 meters, putting them around the size of the Venator and smaller than an ISD, featuring cylindrical hulls with tapered bows, midship hangar bays, and bulbous sterns fitted with 10 large sublight engines, consisting of 4 M8 Star Drive main engines and 6 M4.5 Star Drive maneuvering engines, giving it a megalight rating of 60, which is half an A-wing and 1.5 times the enormous Executor class. The Home One type, known for its heavy cruiser classification, was among the largest capital ships in the Rebel fleet at the time of the Battle of Endor. The ships were built with extensive shielding via the Serage Seal shielding system, and heavy hull armor compared to that of an Imperial-class Star Destroyer. Home One and its sister ships were pivotal as command ships and battleships, leading the Alliance fleet and being true capital ships within the Rebellion. A full Home One type crew consisted of 5,402 personnel, including 78 gunners, with an additional complement of 1,200 troops. The very minimum amount of crew required was 1,230, which applied to both Home One and smaller ships like the Independence. Cargo capacity was substantial at 20,000 tons, and the ship could support up to 2 years' worth of consumables. The hangar capacity varied among ships, with Home One being capable of carrying up to 120 starfighters, including A-wings, B-wings, X-wings, and Y-wings. And some ships, like the Independence, were equipped with fewer starfighters. Though with the nature of Rebellion, the hangar facilities often included shuttles, landing craft, gunboats, assault craft, planetary vehicles, and personal carriers, often of the galaxy's most scruffy nerf herders. It was usually a pretty diverse mix in these hangars. Armament was robust, featuring 29 or up to 36 twin or quad heavy turbolaser batteries, 36 heavy twin ion cannon batteries, 80 quad laser cannon batteries, and 6 heavy tractor beam projectors. Unlike the Executor class, the Home One did not have a dedicated point defense laser system, as its turbolasers were said to be capable of effectively targeting and destroying even small craft, while still being powerful enough to be used for planetary bombardments, though admittedly this was rare. The ships featured advanced sensor and navigation systems, including long-range sensors and a navigation computer. The hyperdrive was powered by the Triluna 400 MGS system, with a primary Class 1 rating and a backup Class 9 system, enabling reliable deep space travel at a speed quicker than just about every Imperial ship out there. The bridge design retained Mon Cala specific control systems with command stations made for Mon Cala officers, although there is evidence of one ship that was modified to accommodate a human command crew, and the bridge contained a CS Mark 12 holoprojector table in the center of a briefing room, which was used to monitor the battle in real time. The commanding officer's chair was attached to a swiveling robotic arm overlooking the crew and a panoramic space view. As we talk about in all these ship breakdowns, commanders really like to get their organic eyes on the situation. Multiple command pods were located on both the dorsal and ventral sides of the ship's hull, which ended up being iconic of the Mon Cala look. Now, the Home One type ships, including their flagship, would not be available to sail to your average citizen, but they did start off serving roles as passenger liners, then later exploration vessels, then battleships, command ships, and carriers. Their significance as premier vessels was established by 20 BBY, which was during the Clone Wars, aligning with the shipyard's continuing reputation for constructing some of the galaxy's most formidable star cruisers. while their rivals, the Quarren, were off making the capital ships for the CIS. Now, most of the stats are the same for the original ship called the Home One that inspired this line, and so it makes sense to look at this cross-section. And though maybe not every single detail is exactly the same in the broader MC80 line, honestly, most of what's going on inside is probably very similar across all the different ships. The ship featured 2 sections that could detach from the main body and operate as independent attack or escape vessels if needed. And since the command crew was exclusively Mon Cala, this drove everything from the ship controls to even having water-filled passages, allowing the crew to move swiftly by swimming through the ship. Over time, these aquatic pathways were removed to make the ship more accessible to other species serving aboard. But despite these changes, the ship retained its distinct Mon Cala touch. So originally, many of these tubes throughout the ship would allow it to be navigated like a big water park, and like the tube system we see on Mon Cala during the Clone Wars, making it probably the quickest intra-ship transit of any capital ship out there. But moving to the rear, we see the relatively large hyperdrive generator and field emitter, which really end up proving what an engineering marvel the Venator was, as it's one of the only other capital ship-sized craft moving with a Class 1. This leads up to the main reactor and the ion engines themselves. These smaller pods on the outside are other escape craft, but there are also these large bulbous sections, which are shown to be actually craft that can break away. This is an ingenious system that if you have the engineering skills that the fishfolk were known for, you would be confident to pull it off. Instead of having an enormous hangar section, this craft can act like a land invasion force. In peacetime, it was just to move this small cruise ship-sized craft down to places like Coruscant, being packed full of dignitaries and merchants, with the entire underside being full of cargo modules. Why have valuable laser cannons and ordnance sitting inside when it could act like another turbolaser battery or turret? And then of course this and the smaller version up towards the bow each have their own smaller escape pods as well. So the main ship can release dozens of escape craft, while still having a conventional hangar with other craft. Then these whole vessels break away with their own bunch of escape craft on them. It must have been overwhelming for imps trying to shoot it down and decide what to focus on, as there could be a good argument that the VIP was on any of these. There would be a ton of escape craft, so pure odds might save the VIP, but the best shielding was on the main ship. But then maybe that was too obvious and they were on a secondary ship. Maybe a shuttle breaks away, only for an escape pod to travel back to the main ship just in time for a hyperspace jump. It's one of the most interesting and unique features of the Home One that we sadly never see play out in any media. Other things to note are that instead of the forest of antennas on top like most craft, all the sensors and comms are packed into the nose, which shows their confidence in that shielding system, as you're facing a lot of crucial tech right toward the enemy incoming fire. And not all these pods on the outside are for escape, but some are structures that house specific tech like tractor beams, turbolasers, and we can see inside of the upper deflector shield projector array, showing how it generates out from each of these ridges, and there are said to be 3 of these, with the second being on the ventral side closest to the enormous deflector shield generator. These 3 would, in theory, act like regenerative walls of defense. The enemy would take out the outer layer, and while it was pounding away on the second one, the first layer should be fixed and back up. The odds that the enemy would be able to overwhelm all 3 shields and then take out your engines or hyperdrive systems before you could escape was almost impossible. And though I am in general in agreement with Thrawn, being against the imp's tendency to build super weapons, but to give Palps and friends credit, it would be things like the Death Star and Eclipse Superstar Destroyer that definitely would have enough to overwhelm something like the Home One in an instant. Maybe you could think a dozen ISDs could do that as well, but there is something to having a weapon that can pop out of hyperspace and simply overwhelm even the most craftiest of shield designs. Something that can one-shot a supposedly impenetrable target, be that a triple-layered ship or even a planetary-sized shield generator. As for its history, the Home One was originally built as a civilian vessel at the Mon Cala shipyards, like most Alliance-era Mon Cala warships. It was designed as an unarmed exploration ship for deep space missions and for making contact with alien species. When the Mon Cala decided to support the Alliance, Home One was converted into a warship and became Admiral Akbar's flagship after he was freed. The ship gained importance after the Alliance's defeat at the Battle of Hoth, which left them without a planetary base. Home One then served as a mobile base for the rebel leadership and became one of the most crucial assets to the rebellion under Akbar, who was now the supreme commander of the rebel fleet. At the Battle of Endor, Home One was one of the largest ships in the fleet, and Akbar led the Alliance forces from its bridge. The ship continued to play a key role, with Akbar personally commanding it in major missions.
Those fighters were a diversion. We're being boarded. Defend the primary reactor, land on the cruiser, and defend its reactor as such.
Including defending the reactor core from stormtrooper attacks, with help from X2. For the next 5 years, Home One was the base of Rogue Squadron, and took part in battles like the Seizure of Coruscant, the Battle of Bilbringi, and the Battle of Sirtrik. Akbar often led engagements from Home One, so it needed to be kept ready at all times, and repair yards in orbit over Coruscant maintained the ship. Even though newer Mon Cala ships like the MC80B and MC90 were introduced, and by 10 ABY Akbar commanded from the MC90 Defiance, yet even then Home One was still seeing action. It led a task force against Leona Tavera's Invid pirates in 11 BBY, alongside Rogue Squadron and 2 Victory-class Star Destroyers. Akbar continued to use Home One as his flagship until at least 23 ABY. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, there are a ton of discrepancies on ship specifics like weapons, something you'd expect since this came out more than 40 years ago. One of my favorite small details is that in the novelization of Return of the Jedi, Home One was referred to as the Headquarters Frigate, with that being in italics like it's its name, while Home One was used more like a call sign, as if there were a bunch of other homes within that unit, like the call signs within Red Squadron, like Red 6. And in Empire at War, it was twice the size of the ISD. If you do want to check out some of the resource guides for yourself, here are the most useful ones. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, maybe the Death Star wasn't so much for destroying planets, but for just sticking it to the fish folk. And the Force to be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? After breaking down the Home One, let's get into what might be the second most popular Mon Cala creation. The MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruiser, simply known as the Liberty class cruiser, was a heavy star cruiser that typically measured 1,200 meters in length, though some ships of this line reached up to 1,500 meters, or about 3,937 feet, making the shortest ones of this line just a bit longer than the Venator, and the longest variant just a Zillo Beast plus Jawa triplets shorter than the ISD. This vessel was part of the MC80 Star Cruiser line, which included 2 main types. One of these was that larger one, which most of us know as the heavily armed MC80A Home One type heavy star cruiser. Mon Cala shipyards manufactured the Liberty cruisers, which were priced at 104 million credits each, making them less than the ISD and almost 2 times the Venator. If the naming convention isn't confusing enough already, there is another similar Mon Cala star cruiser, dubbed in canon as the Unidentified Cruiser, but in Legends it was always called the MC80A, and did resemble the Liberty but lacked the distinct port and starboard wings. And it's not just the diversity over all these different lines, but no 2 MC80s were alike. Each was built with a unique design tailored for its original role as a civilian transport. These ships served as long-range explorers or luxury passenger vessels, and each cruiser was carefully handcrafted by whoever commissioned it with precise specifications. These ships were long, sleek, and had an organic shape, and were able to rival the Imperial II-class Star Destroyers in both length and overall mass. They were sturdy, over-engineered, and well-suited for the challenges of constant interstellar travel and combat. The Liberty class could carry enough supplies for 2 years of constant operation. Going inside, you would see water-filled corridors for the Mon Cala crew, who would swim through the ship just like we see in their cities on Mon Cala. Though eventually these were drained and replaced with floors and ventilation systems. And thousands of the original viewports from the civilian versions were plated over in order to make sure the hull was protected. The ship's hull displays and battle graphics were made for the Mon Calamare's visual spectrum, with control stations requiring specific movements that other species could not replicate. The pale interior featured multiple passageways, a communication center, storage rooms, security areas, and airlocks. Even some of the original Liberty cruisers came with military-grade deflector shields, and of course, all retrofitted ships had deflector shield generators. They were powered by 9 M8 Star Drive engines, allowing speeds of up to 60 megalight or 975 kilometers per hour in atmosphere, putting it right there with the Venator and exactly the same as the ISD. They had a primary Class 1 hyperdrive and a secondary Class 9 hyperdrive, which made it faster than almost all Imperial capital ships, and was remarkably able to keep up with starfighters. It's very rarely seen in ships of this size, though the Great Venator was a Class 1 also. I can go on a whole tangent on how this feature allowed the Republic to secure such large areas of space from the greater number of CIS forces, but we'll get more into that in the Venator video. These ships were fitted with long-range sensors and escape pods in their civilian models, and despite their power and versatility, they were difficult to maintain due to their unique design for each vessel, which often meant that components were not interchangeable, even if you had a bunch of what were still called Liberty-type ships. This made the Rebel Alliance cautious in how and where they deployed them. Most Liberty-class ships typically had a ventral hangar bay, while some models included a port-side hangar with a hangar door. Beneath their sleek exteriors, they hid heavy weaponry in strong hulls that often took the Imperials by surprise. Standard armaments included retrofitted twin heavy turbolaser batteries, which were 48 in total, divided evenly with 12 facing forward, 12 to each side, and 12 at the aft. They were also equipped with 20 twin battleship ion cannon batteries, arranged similarly with 5 in each direction. And while these cruisers lacked point defense laser cannons, they boasted 6 heavy tractor beam projectors and missile tubes. They also carried massive ion cannons mounted along their broadside, and so when you put it all together, these are one of the few ships in the Rebel line that actually combines ion cannons, tractor beams to hold them in place, missiles which were harder for the Rebels to come across, and turbolaser batteries that were as strong as those on the ISD, all proving why the Mon Cala ships were the most important warships of the Rebel Alliance. A Liberty cruiser typically had a full wing of 3 squadrons or 36 starfighters, with 1 squadron often dedicated to reconnaissance. However, they had the capacity to carry up to 10 squadrons, totaling 72 starfighters, and their usual complement would also include shuttles, landing craft, and various utility vehicles, while supporting a passenger capacity of 1,200 soldiers. Ships with port-side hangar bays featured an opening behind the hangar, housing a weapons control room with 3 large ion cannons extending beyond the hull, protected by a shield. These cannons could be vulnerable, exposing their cooling coils and causing explosive reactions if damaged. The Liberty cruiser's crew numbered 5,402, including officers, pilots, and enlisted members. Command crews were usually Mon Calamari, though refits allowed other species such as humans, Celestins, and Quarrens to serve aboard. The Starfighter wing was commanded by a wing commander, who reported to the ship's captain and the fleet's fighter command. Despite being designed with Mon Calamari in mind, over the years they had to adapt to a diverse range of crew members. As mentioned, these cruisers were originally built as civilian ships for long-range exploration, or as enormous luxury yachts, packed full of luxury quality touches like our sponsor Helix. But once refitted, they became part of the Mon Calamari Planetary Defense Fleet, protecting the Mon Calamari system and its colonies. As more of these ships were converted, they took on the role of heavy battle cruisers for the Rebel Alliance, serving as starfighter carriers, command ships, and security cruisers for major engagements. They often maintained a fleet of support ships and functioned as mobile bases for starfighter patrols or as protection for critical Alliance assets like shipyards and command staff. When deployed in combat, a Liberty cruiser typically used a broadside attack against enemy warships. If one side of the ship faced significant threat, it could reposition its shields to defend that flank specifically. Without built-in point defense weapons, Liberty cruisers relied heavily on their starfighter squadrons to guard against bombers, patrol boats, gunships, and boarding vessels. In 2 BBY, before the formal declaration of the Rebel Alliance, Mon Calamari star cruisers underwent significant refits at the Talaris Rebel star docks. This effort aimed to transform them into proper warships following repeated evacuations from their homeworld, Mon Cala. Among these ships were the MC75 Profundity, the several MC80 Home One type heavy star cruisers, along with many others. And after the destruction of Alderaan in 0 BBY, the MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruiser Aurora became the flagship of a fleet commanded by Admiral Akbar. This fleet included 8 EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigates, 8 CR-90 corvettes, 5 GR-75 medium transports, and a mix of T-65B X-Wing starfighters, BTL A-4 Y-Wing bombers, and UT-60D U-Wing support craft from Echo Squadron. The fleet intercepted a distress call from an Alderaanian refugee convoy at the trading port Foster Haven, prompting Echo Squadron to respond. Upon arrival, they were met by an Imperial fleet led by Commodore Ray Sloan, and quickly called for reinforcements. The Aurora and its support ships soon arrived at Foster Haven and engaged the Imperial II-class Star Destroyer Vigilance. Despite the loss of one frigate, the Alliance forces successfully rescued the refugees and managed to retreat with the remaining fleet intact. During the Galactic Civil War, the Empire launched an invasion of the planet Zorn in the Farah sector with a task force consisting of the Gladiator-class Star Destroyer Blood Ambition and the Raider-class corvettes Sargonton and Warhawk. In response, the Rebel Alliance sent a naval squadron called the Allied Armada, which included 2 MC80 Liberty cruisers and several other warships. A few months after a mutiny on Mon Cala led to the escape of star cruisers from the Mon Cala mercantile fleet, at least 12 MC80 Liberty cruisers gathered with the other newly acquired ships at the Alliance's MOC space docks. The Rebel Alliance Navy had retrofitted several Mon Calamari cruisers with Shrew Turun systems and assembled Alliance leaders and ambassadors for a ceremonial launch. Among the assembled ships was the Liberty itself, and in total, about 37 Mon Calamari star cruisers were present for this event. But as the ceremony began, it became clear that critical systems across the fleet were non-functional. And at that moment, Darth Vader and the Imperial Death Squadron, which included the Executor, and 3 Imperial II-class Star Destroyers emerged from hyperspace and destroyed the cruiser Yavin's Hope. Death Squadron launched a full-scale assault on the MOC space docks, bombarding the defenseless Alliance warships. When the Rebel starfighters managed to take off, Death Squadron countered by releasing all their fighter wings. The MC80 Republic was one of the first to regain functionality, using clearance codes to bring its systems online and escape. It returned to help the remaining Alliance fleet, and once the codes were distributed, several MC80 Liberty cruisers managed to jump into hyperspace and avoid destruction. After the Battle of Hoth and 3 ABY, the Rebel Alliance Navy broke into several divisions, including the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 11th divisions. While some divisions were lost, the 4th, 7th, and 11th managed to regroup and travel to Parnesia, where they would aid the 2nd Division, which was under attack by the ISD Tarkin's Will. The combined Rebel fleet included various warships, among them at least 2 MC80 Liberty cruisers, and 3 MC80 Home Ones. There is the odd case of one of these Liberty cruisers facing serious issues when its systems malfunctioned, and starfighters collided in the flight deck, leading to crew injuries and hospitalizations. But it was later discovered that the cruiser had been sabotaged. While on a different mission, an MC80 Liberty cruiser led an attack on an Imperial weapons lab, showing the surprising maneuverability of this ship as it navigated a narrow path through this sector. In 4 ABY, after discovering the existence of the 2nd Death Star at Endor, along with the Emperor's presence there, the Rebel Alliance gathered most of its navy at Sullust. Around this time, the Liberty cruiser Invincible Faith intercepted a coded message from Moff Derek Wraith, revealing that the information gained by the Bothan spies was actually a trap. In response, the Imperial Special Forces Unit Inferno Squadron infiltrated the Invisible Faith to delete the message. Commander Iden Versio allowed herself to be captured and taken aboard, while her ID-10 Seeker droid infiltrated the ship separately. The droid navigated past Alliance personnel to reach Versio, who freed herself and escaped the brig. During this, Admiral Akbar called on the Invincible Faith in order to join their assault on the Death Star.
This proves we will divert the Empire's attention away from Sullust. We are amassing the fleet in preparation for our attack on Endor.
Versio and her droid managed to reach the communication center, deleted the message, and triggered a general alarm. After fighting off Alliance forces, she escaped through an airlock and was retrieved by her starship, the Corvus, just as the Invincible Faith began firing its ion cannons. Once the fleet was fully assembled at Sullust and a strike team infiltrated Endor to disable the Death Star's shield generator, the Alliance fleet traveled to Endor via the Sanctuary pipeline. The fleet included several Mon Cala star cruisers, with at least 5 MC80 Liberty type heavy star cruisers among them. But when it was discovered that the deflector shield was still active, General Lando Calrissian and Admiral Akbar ordered the fleet to pull back.
It's a trap!
The Imperial fleet launched its fighters, sparking intense battles around the Alliance ships. A TIE Interceptor would crash into the ventral hangar of one of these cruisers, which was then soon destroyed by the Death Star's super laser, obliterating the Liberty and nearby ships. After the MC80A Nautilin met the same fate, Calrissian convinced Akbar to engage the Star Destroyers at close range, reasoning that they could take down some ships before the fleet was overwhelmed.
We'll last longer than we will against that Death Star, and we might just take a few of them with us.
The Alliance fleet pressed the attack, with Liberty cruisers engaging fire with Star Destroyers. When the ground team disabled the shield generator, fighters stormed the Death Star's interior while the fleet concentrated fire on the Executor. Though of course, it would be taken out by the smallest unit in their entire fleet. After the Death Star's destruction, an MC80 Liberty cruiser descended to Endor's surface as Alliance dropships delivered reinforcements. Inferno Squadron, stationed near the ruined shield generator, did manage to escape and reach orbit, where 2 MC80 Liberty cruisers navigated through the Death Star's wreckage, toward a third cruiser battling the ISD Eviscerator. Inferno Squadron fought off rebel forces and regrouped with the Eviscerator before making their escape. Then, shortly after the Battle of Endor, a Liberty cruiser led a small fleet that included 4 CR-90 corvettes and numerous starfighters in an attack on Fondor. Their target was the Fondor shipyards and the docked Imperial Star Destroyer Dauntless. The Liberty cruiser launched 3 UT-60D U-wing support craft and fired its powerful broadside ion cannons at the Dauntless. But Inferno Squad intervened and destroyed the transports. Acting on Moff Wraith's orders, Iden Versio boarded the cruiser, sabotaging it from within. This damage caused one of the CR-90s to crash into the cruiser, and the Dauntless broke free of the shipyard and unleashed its firepower on the cruiser, resulting in a dazzling explosion and Imperial victory. After a raid on the Wretch of Tehran, the Alliance uncovered details of Operation Cinder, part of the Emperor's posthumous contingency plan aimed at devastating Imperial worlds. And determined to save as many as they could, the Alliance prepared to act, and during a skirmish on Vardos, Versio and Delmicos surrendered to the Alliance and were taken aboard the Liberty cruiser Restoration. And it was in the hangar bay that General Lando Calrissian convinced them to join the mission to stop Operation Cinder on Naboo. The Alliance fleet, including Danger Squadron, the Restoration, and the Melcrawler II, were able to work with the local Naboo forces in order to secure a victory. When the alliance to restore the Republic became the New Republic, many of these ships continued their service in the New Republic Defense Force. One Liberty cruiser played a key role in the Battle of Var-Shah, fighting alongside an MC75 Star Cruiser and an MC95E Star Cruiser, along with supporting frigates and corvettes. The combined fleet successfully destroyed the Var-Shah dockyard and an Imperial Star Destroyer, forcing the ISD Overseer and surviving Imperial fighters to retreat. As the Empire broke into various factions like the Imperial Royalist Coalition, the Yomo Council, and the Chattawan government, Consular Gallius Rex, the de facto Imperial leader, gathered most of the Imperial military on the planet Jakku for a final stand against the New Republic. After the New Republic Senate approved intervention, the NR Defense Force was mobilized for battle. Liberty cruisers and other Republic ships emerged from hyperspace and launched an attack on Imperial forces in Jakku's orbit, beginning the Battle of Jakku. While Liberty cruisers and other warships engaged the Imperial flagship, the Executor-class Ravager and its support fleet, some New Republic ships broke through to fight in Jakku's atmosphere. The cruisers exchanged broadsides with ISDs, leading to heavy losses on both sides. Starfighters and bombers clashed throughout, while New Republic ground forces landed to engage Imperial strongholds and rescue downed allies. The battle saw many Liberty cruisers and Star Destroyers destroyed, with massive hull fragments crashing to the deserts below. Some, like Freedom's Dawn, fell intact to the surface, and despite heavy damage, other Liberty cruisers continued to fight, even under assault from TIE bombers. Iden Versio would play a key role in destroying the Eviscerator's fighters and bombers, while the capital ship was being bombarded by another Liberty. After the New Republic victory, the Galactic Concordance was signed by Grand Vizier Mas Amedda, officially ending the Galactic Civil War. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind-the-scenes facts, first appeared in Return of the Jedi, where ILM crafted a detailed miniature model for the Liberty cruiser, along with the MC80 Home One type. But most of the differences are really just adding wings onto the existing Mon Cala Star Cruiser model, meant to make this final battle show the diversity of the Rebel fleet. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out all these resources used. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, never underestimate the fish folk, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? Continuing with the Mon Calamari ship breakdowns, let's get into the MC80A, a formidable variant in the MC80 line, which was importantly produced by Mon Calamari shipyards after they gained freedom from Imperial control in 1BBY. Unlike earlier MC80 versions that were repurposed from exploration ships or luxury liners, essentially space cruise ships, that were then weaponized for the Rebel Alliance, the MC80A was purpose-built for war, making it leaner and more powerful than its predecessors. Measuring 1,200 meters or 0.75 miles in length, it was about 5 ARC-170s longer than the Venator, and about a C-9979 less than an Imperial Star Destroyer. There was no official price, but it was probably close to the Liberty type, which was $104K, again right in between the Venator and ISD. It had a crew of 5,402 and space for an additional 1,200 troops, while being armed with 48 Tamanback XV9 turbolaser batteries, controlled by a Platt Droma targeting computer. which is a bit of a surprising drop-off in weaponry. The turbo lasers are as powerful as those found on the ISD and these other Mon Cala behemoths, but it seems to lack the ion weaponry and torpedoes, which were put to excellent use by the Liberty. Though like its sister ships, it did have a great complement. Its 3 fighter bays housed 6 starfighter squadrons, 3 composed of BTL Y-wing starfighters, 1 with A-wing interceptors, and 2 with X-wing starfighters. It featured a Searage seal shielding system, which was powered by a Triluna 400 MGS star drive and hyperdrive system, allowing it to reach a top sublight speed of 60 megalights, and likely had that same 975 km per hour top speed in atmosphere. Propulsion came from 10 clustered engine thrusters at the ventral stern of the rounded, oddly oblong hull. The gray exterior was marked by pods and bulges, with a single elevated pod situated midship or further back on some of the ships, and the hull overall with its scalloped organic design would evoke an appearance of a ray, as Mon Cala aesthetics often mimic nature, which was just a smart way to make sure that they were able to operate underwater, which was their primary role before operating in space. We don't get any confirmation if these pods come off like they do in the Home One, which was exceptional for its whole breakaway larger ships and tons of smaller escape pods. It really could just be that they were like some of these other pods, which were filled with ship assets like turbo laser batteries or shield generators. By 4 ABY leading up to the Battle of Endor, the MC80A Star Cruiser had become an integral part of the Rebel Alliance fleet, actively serving for nearly 5 years at this point in the Galactic Civil War. Following the daring rescue of General Han Solo on Tatooine, a fleet of Alliance starships, including these A's, would gather near Sullust, and Rebel leaders assembled aboard the flagship Home One to devise their plan to attack the Empire's second Death Star. We can see one of these A's as it was near the Home One as the fleet prepared for their hyperspace jump to Endor, and at least 10 MC80A cruisers took part in the ensuing battle, which, though an Imperial trap, turned out to be the greatest victory for the Alliance. Of all those ships, at least 6 survived the fierce battle. The A's would continue their service into the Rebel Alliance as it evolved into the New Republic, and one specific cruiser, the Naratus, was sent to the Outer Rim territories for anti-piracy missions. Under the command of Mon Cala Captain Jenkal, the Naratus succeeded in dismantling the pirate group known as the Quemian Survivors. By the time of the Corellian Crisis in 18 ABY, the Naratus, considered aging by retired Vice Admiral Kursk Malia, remained one of the New Republic's few operational capital ships. And while on patrol duty in the Coruscant system, it used a tractor beam to seize an unidentified ex-TIE fighter. The pilot, undercover intelligence agent Belindi Kalinda, was brought aboard and later handed over to Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker, revealing a plot to trigger a supernova in the Thantra Zilbar star. The Naratus led an evacuation force to the Thantra Zilba system, striving to rescue as many inhabitants as possible before the star's destruction by the ancient Center Point Station superweapon, activated by the Sicorian Triad. Luckily, it was still in service in the New Republic fleet during the Yuuzhan Vong War, where at least one would play a critical role in intercepting a Yuuzhan Vong escape pod carrying Jedi apprentice Jason Solo over the Calamari shipyards, putting a perfect, poetic end to the ship that served freedom. In the original Mount Calamari that broke away, overthrew the Empire, maintained peace, and eventually fought off the Vong. That's it for its breakdown. It's a bit shorter, but it's one of these classic ships that we're always seeing and just never understand exactly what makes it different. And as for behind the scenes facts, this wingless sort of Liberty class first made its appearance in Return of the Jedi, though it was not named at the time. ILM model artists aimed to expand the Rebels' fleet visual variety, and so they modified the original wingless model into the Liberty type by adding wings and swapping out one engine for a pod. The name MC80A Star Cruiser was first introduced in West End Games' 1990 The Rebel Alliance sourcebook, while many earlier references just kinda gave a vague MC80 to all of these different ships, which we now know as the Home One, the Liberty, and the MC80A. Specifically, it was used interchangeably in the Thrawn Trilogy sourcebook, and continued over a bunch of video games like the X-Wing games. And one kind of frustratingly lore-breaking point is that in the 1996 Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels and the official Star Wars Fact File, as well as the 2012 Essential Guide to Warfare, all point out that this is a more stronger version of the MC80A Star Cruiser, which would be the Home One line. So I would expect it to have the heavy twin ion cannon batteries, which were 36 in number, 80 quad laser cannons, maybe even some missile and torpedo tubes, since the Home One type Star Cruiser only had 29 to 36 heavy turbo laser batteries. And so the A version is jumping that up to 48, but it'd be odd to say that it's more powerful overall if it lost all the ion weapons, laser cannons, and explosive munition options. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, fishfolk engineering is simply unmatched, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? Continuing with the greatness of the MC80 line, we're going to cover the more obscure evacuation cruiser. It was a modified version of the standard MC80 Star Cruiser, produced by Mon Cala shipyards and adapted by the technicians to serve as an evacuation transport rather than a warship. This cruiser measured 1,200 meters in length, or 3/4 of a mile, making it 75% the length of an ISD, and at the shorter limit of the MC80 line, which had types that could range up to 1,500 meters, just short of an ISD. And unlike its armed counterpart, it had all the shielding and weaponry removed to maximize space and efficiency. The evacuation cruiser had a megalite speed of 60 and a maximum atmospheric speed of 600 km per hour, or only 373 miles per hour, making it one of the slowest ships out there, but still faster than the original civilian Gazanti, which was made slow in hopes of dissuading pirates from attacking them. And despite removing so much, it's also the slowest in the MC80 line, which for something that's trying to prioritize getting people safely away from something, seems like a very strange stat. Its hyperdrive is also slow, rated at a Class 4 for primary use and a Class 14 as a backup. They're clearly not worried about getting anywhere fast, but like the name suggests, maybe they were just trying to pump out a whole bunch of these as cheap as possible, and just having a hyperdrive meant that you could get away. Once you were in the blue void of hyperspace, you were safe. Navigation systems would make sure they get to wherever they wanted to be, and though the interior of the ship is not exactly the same, the inside would look something close to this cross-section from the Home One. And one funny thing to think about is that if this evacuation model also had breakaway ships and escape pods like these blisters along the surface. I kinda doubt it, because again, you're just trying to get everyone into that blue void. If they were in a situation that was so bad that they would need breakaway ships, they would likely just get shot down anyways. With a crew of 1,011 and a minimum operating requirement of 429, the cruiser could also carry between 75,000 and 150,000 passengers, making it essential for large-scale evacuations. It had a cargo capacity of 16,000 tons, which was said to be enough to sustain its occupants with consumables for up to 6 weeks. All of that is truly incredible. If you go halfway and say that on average they had 113,000 passengers, that's more than twice the total crew and passengers of the ISD, which was overpacked to begin with. And you can imagine it was cramped, but who cares when your planet was being turned into lava? The fact that so many people could be fed means that for all we know, these blisters along the surface are filled with canned dewback meat and Ewok-flavored ramen to feed all these refugees. Now, there isn't much on its history. Even though this ship is a great idea, and you would expect to see tons of similar ships like this in a galaxy that has had non-stop warfare for 35,000 years at least. But it's oddly one of the few examples that we have of just a pure, dedicated evacuation ship. Simple, cheap engines and a hyperdrive, and an interior completely dedicated to beds and food storage. It was introduced during the Battle of Calamari in 10 ABY, that's 6 years after the Battle of Endor, and it played a vital role in the New Republic's efforts to safeguard large populations during crises. Its role as an evacuation transport highlighted its value in humanitarian and strategic missions where rapid, mass evacuations were needed. As the Imperial assault on Mon Cala raged on, Mon Cala technicians worked tirelessly to convert MC80 Star Cruisers into these dedicated evacuation transports, likely taking what would have been warships and just moving in tons of supplies instead of adding all that weaponry. And they were able to achieve an impressive rate of over 1 conversion per day. And they were prepared to carry the entire planet's population to safety from the relentless onslaught of the world devastators. Although the evacuation ultimately proved unnecessary, countless Mon Calamari boarded the cruisers and fled, seeking refuge from the chaos of the battle. So that's it for this obscure ship breakdown. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like it. Once you realize you can travel off-world, realize aliens can invade, and make sure to prioritize evacuation ships just in case. And the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This complete breakdown of the MC80 Star Cruiser will pull from every resource available, including one of the best cross-sections of a Mon Cala creation that we have ever seen. And by the end, we'll completely understand this post-Endor ship. With the fall of the Empire, the Alliance to restore the Republic did just that, and after capturing Coruscant, the New Republic was formed. Now, most of the galaxy did not have a clear distinction between Clone War and Galactic Civil War. To most people out there, it was just nearly 3 decades of constant warfare under different names. which is why the Mon Calamari were so shocked with Mon Mothma, no relation. She felt that evil itself had been defeated, and repeating the worst mistake in history with the Ruusan reformations, just like when the Old Republic felt that evil itself was now gone with the destruction of the Sith Empire. Now that Sith Lord Sidious was dead-ish, she wanted to dissolve the New Republic military. Luckily, many of these MC85 were already commissioned by then, but either way, the Mon Cala monarchy had no intention of giving up their ability to defend themselves. The glorious shipyards would hit their peak in both original and new canon timelines, eventually coming to encircle the entire planet. The MC85 would become the mainline warship to protect the noble fish folks, and we'll see why it's very impressive in a lot of ways, but there are some very strange mistakes here. At a length of 3,437.37 meters, or 11,281 feet, it was more than twice the length of the ISD, and even with the cylindrical design, it was only around 280 meters thinner than the ISD, about the difference of a Lancer and a TIE fighter, while its height of 461.61 meters, or 1,515 feet, would make it just a Wookiee couple and a Jawa taller than the ISD. If it showed up here on Earth, it would be more than 10 times the largest warship in the world, the Gerald R. Ford nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, or 4 times the Burj Khalifa. Now we should work through this cross-section starting at the rear with the 11 sublight ion engines that produce a megalight rating, or the speed in space, said to be greater than 130, which would make it on par with the Resurgent-class Star Destroyer. And faster than almost everything. Seriously, everything from the TIE Defender to even the newer RZ-2 A-Wing, even the First Order TIE FO. The only things faster than this are the TIE VN and TIE SF. We get a great shot at the reactor, which is essentially just a supersized version of what powers everything from the Star Cruisers down to TIE Fighters, engines that take a gas, ionize it, and shoot it out the back in order to create thrust. And having 11 of these means it would have great maneuverability, and we get this great look at the thrust vectoring, and it's all covered in layers of armored cowling. The hyperdrive generator is just in front of this array, and it's actually a pair, something I don't think I've seen in any other ship. And I'd say it's pretty important, with hyperdrive damage going down in the history books for being the first domino to fall in a process that would eventually destroy the Sith. Many ships have a backup hyperdrive, but the way this is explained, and just the visuals, really seem to be saying that this is a backup of the actual likely Class 1 hyperdrive. It has 2 Class 1s. So likely in this post-war era, hunting down Imperial remnants and all sorts of crime lords, they wanted to make sure that they could make it back to support any other fleet anywhere in the galaxy, having redundancy for such a crucial system. And within this bubble blister is the deflector shield generator. And we even get the micro emitters identified. These would be all along the surface of the ship, taking the ability to focus the shield power in certain directions, made famous with the X-Wing.
Put your deflectors on double front.
And it's on just about every ship, but with these micro emitters it would be more precise control than ever. Though we should think that the shields of this latter era, with far more ability to produce things as great as the engineers could imagine. I mean, you're not the underdogs building these illegally in secret anymore, like in the time of the Empire. They had more resources than ever, and could build openly, but while that makes sense, there is not enough detail to say it is better than the Liberty, and I'd still say it doesn't come close to the Imperious.
They can't lose us, but they can keep at a range where our cannons are ineffective against their shields.
Of course, we saw it taking numerous hits for a very long time, but this would have likely been true for many other Mon Cal creations as well. We get a great look at the Shield Operations Center being located deep in the main body of the ship, not in some blister on the surface or a bridge that sticks out. On the ventral side, we see more antennas. These are for targeting and long-range sensor arrays, while this is the short-range comms, with the turbolaser targeting array that is housed in this pod. Right in front of that is one of the turbolaser cannon blisters. Many of these blisters are serving specialized roles, like deflector shield projectors, and this one is a tractor beam emitter, while the entire nose section is filled with more sensor arrays. And for going on offense, we see the sensor jamming and stealth systems, which I think is a great addition to a Star Cruiser. There's a really neat feature with this ventral bridge complex tucked up under the nose area, with the main bridge being up top. Not as exposed as the Kuat creations like the ISD and Venator, but there are these panoramic windows, and the entire bridge is very clean and spacious with panels for all the different specialists. Knowing what happens to this bridge is pretty ironic, given that it's one of the better integrated bridges in other Star Wars ships. What seems a bit risky is the enormous fuel tank storage. It looks like Zillo Beast could swim around in there. All that fuel is up front. People were mad at the fuel plotline with this ship. I made a bunch of videos on how all ships in Star Wars have always used fuel. It's in A New Hope and expanded all throughout all the decades since. You can still think it's a dumb or boring plotline, but not lore breaking or anything like that. But funny enough, after all the outrage, there is still a fuel aspect of the ship that doesn't make sense. You can't have so much existing lore on having weapons, shields, armor, etc., all built around the idea that firing forward and receiving most of your attacks head-on is normal. Then make sure to put your enormous fuel tank up front. Most real-world planes, from fighter jets to airliners, store fuel in the wings or try to be central in the main fuselage because this weight distribution helps with balance. Traveling through atmospheres is a major part of their job. It's why we're almost always given an atmospheric speed detail. And it's also weird to make a whole plot point around the lack of fuel when this is one of the only ships supporting this sort of hybrid system with the ion scoop particle collector. This must mean that it's able to take in ionized gas and transform that into ship energy. So of course, out of universe, they wrote the movie script first and then the cross-section as an afterthought. But how funny that even these little details show a lack of coherent vision. So I guess after all the hoopla, I even have a niche fuel complaint about the MC85. I kinda like the ion scoop idea, and there are also these atmospheric ducts that take in the air in whatever environment it finds itself in, and runs it through this atmospheric processing plant, sorting the different gases and allowing them to refill on whatever breathable gas the crew needs, with that crew being a very diverse array of species at this time in the Calamari builds. Some of the original Calamari creations were filled with water since it was just for them, and this allowed for all sorts of useful things, like you don't need to walk on the floor, you can swim up to all sides of the room, like a zero-G environment for humans. There's no real difference in being sideways or upside down. So while that is not how these later ships work since they have crews with all sorts of non-aquatic species, they do retain the amazing high-speed travel network of water-filled pipes that run throughout the ship, just like what we saw with their cities, allowing them to shoot around like they're in pneumatic bank tubes. There are several crew decks across the ship, with a large portion on the ventral side toward the bow, and then above the atmospheric processors and water tubes, while the VIP quarters are above the bridge, usually the most important staff and commander, all accommodating a minimal crew of around 1,139, which is just under the MC80, and it likely had a near double of the potential passengers or troop capacity, so around 2,400. And there was a great detail of an onboard droid repair bay, which makes a lot of sense when droids play such a crucial role to ship repair. Combine that with your 2 hyperdrives, and all you have to do is make sure you don't run around on E, and this thing should run worry-free. We don't get a cargo capacity number, but if it was around double the MC80, then it would be around 40,000 tons, all stored in these 60 modular storage containers. And lastly, we have the main hangar bay, which would be mirrored on both sides, with this unique hangar access tunnel, which was intended to allow a queue to build, so you can open up all these panels and take on more ships than the hangar itself can hold, for when they need to quickly get in and be transported through hyperspace, or when vehicles are being refueled and restocked with torpedoes. The queue for all these ships can form here. The total complement's a bit strange because it's just listing what was currently on board, so keep in mind that the MC80 Home One could carry from 36 to 120 starfighters. So with this being 3 times the size, the configuration of fighters, bombers, and interceptors could have been substantial. But when we see it, there are at least 4 SF-17 heavy bombers, a resistance transport pod, 30 U-55 orbital load lifters, 4 RZ-2 A-wings, and 7 T-70 X-wings. And the total armament was 18 heavy torpedoes, 18 heavy ion cannons, 12 point defense laser cannons, 6 proton torpedo launchers, and multiple tractor beam projectors. And none of that made any sense, with it only being a quarter of the guns on the Home One, which was in service around 30 years before this and built when it was illegal to do so and with far less resources. There's really no justifying any of that. As for history, we only know of those few fateful days with the Raddus, the flagship of the Resistance Navy, used during the evacuation of Dakar. Kybo Ren would use that unique hangar Q lane during his run, firing torpedoes right into the hangar before moving to the bridge. While he did not fire on his mother, the TIE SF, which had the qualitative upgrade over the Imperial TIEs by having torpedoes, they did fire and took out the bridge. And the Raddus was of course destroyed during the hyperspace ram into the Supremacy. I covered this pretty quickly at the time, but this was a way smaller channel. But I noticed that in the cross-section it showed, and really the whole point of being tracked through hyperspace was focused on, based on this new device which worked by having a chamber that was constantly in hyperspace. So there was a part of the ship that's in hyperspace at all times. So when the Raddus goes through light speed, it crashes into this. And the impact is combining this acceleration with being ripped back into real space like we see with the interdictors. While most ships would have passed through, like a sheet of paper on a table, on 2 different dimensional planes, with the tracker and the Supremacy there was this contact point. With that impact, this flagship experiences one of the most visually stunning and crucial self-sacrifices in history. though many other MC80 starcruisers would be part of the 16,000 ship Galaxy fleet that came to the rescue during the Battle of Exegol. And like with the MC95, there were a ton of different variants that we can see. So that's it for the breakdown. The only real behind the scenes fact is if you want to pick up that, it comes from The Last Jedi, incredible cross sections. I don't know if it's in the updated complete cross sections book. Please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. If you want, for just $1 a month, members get access to early videos, subscribe so you don't miss anything, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, I won't be counting this ship dud against the Mon Cala record, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This complete breakdown of the MC90 will pull from every source available to completely understand how it worked and its history. After the MC series, from the MC30 to the MC80 variants, including the command ship Home One, all proved just how great the fishfolk Mon Cala were at engineering, these vessels being mostly refits of civilian ships, some that were just civic buildings in their underwater cities. The fact that the Mon Cala fleet played such a huge role in toppling the massive machine that was the Empire is one of the greatest underdog stories in the galaxy far, far away, and of course culminated in the victory at Endor. When Coruscant was captured, the New Republic was now the governing body, and they set to work in creating their new line of ships, and the MC90 was approved just 6 months after the Battle of Endor. But the NR was still fighting Imperial remnant forces, and just working to make sure the galaxy didn't descend into anarchy and chaos with petty thugs moving in on systems. So this new ship line was shelved for a while, as NR forces tried to maintain order. But just the approval of this plan and the move to their own distinct uniform military force marks the start of a movement that would culminate in the New Class program. Since the rebels were taking every ship that would join them, these ragtag forces had just about every kind of vessel you could think of, in every shape or size imaginable, which robbed them of the economies of scale of being able to produce standardized parts and units for a coherent, planned-out fleet. One funny aspect often overlooked is that you might have a hangar full of mechanics that have no idea how to repair or service this new starfighter model that just floated in. 5 mechanics might be experts in 5 different ships, but not the 6th Mystery Edition. Of course, the same goes for pilots, and even commanders, who would be able to plan a better attack if they fully understood and had a long training history with each of their units. The confusion of the ragtag rebel forces had to be replaced with a standardized military, just like in the days of the Republic. The primary objective of the New Republic's New Class program was to design and construct starships that offered greater standardization in both internal components, such as command consoles, and external features, like their hull panels. The early phase of this initiative resulted in the development of vessels that were essentially upgrades of existing, widely used designs. These included the Corona-class frigate, Belarus-class medium cruiser, and the Republic-class Star Destroyer. And one of the key ships to emerge from this phase was the MC90 Star Cruiser, with the first ship, Defiance, completed shortly before the Battle of Mon Cala in 10 ABY. This marked the first Mon Cala built warship for the Republic, all created through this standardized design process. That program also led to the development of 2 reconnaissance vessels, the droid-controlled Ferret class and the larger crewed Prowler class. An interesting combination of the wisdom from the CIS military, but also recognizing that some assets should be crewed by organics. As the new ships were introduced, the New Republic began phasing out the older starships, particularly those that had been converted from civilian or commercial use. The designs of the new class ships were influenced by Bevel Lamelisk's analysis of the captured worldcraft. And although the MC90 would inspire this movement, the first true new class vessel was the Sashin-class light escort. Following its success, the Republic Engineering Corporation, which led the engineering efforts of the program, decided to use the same engines, systems, keel, and hull to construct the Hagen-class fleet tender. This approach of using a base design to create multiple ship types became the foundation of the new class program. Ultimately, the program settled on 4 base designs with keel lengths of 190 meters, 375 meters, 700 meters, and 1040 meters, named after the first of each design. The 5th battle group was the first to consist entirely of new class vessels. Under the command of General Ethan Abbott, the group showcased their versatility and strength of the new class during the New Republic's engagements with the Yaveltha. And the new class modernization program was completed around 20 ABY, 16 years after Endor. By this time, the MC90 had become one of the most formidable warships in the New Republic Defense Fleet, frequently serving as the flagships for fleets and task force. It was deemed a heavy star cruiser and cost 131,800,000 credits, which is still less than an Imperial Star Destroyer, which might say more about the excessive waste in the overly bureaucratic and corrupt intersection of Kuat Drive Yard boardrooms and Imperial overseers. Its length of 1,255 meters, or 0.78 miles, made it about a DP-20 gunship longer than the Venator, and about 78% of the ISD. Its hyperdrive was a Class 1, making it of the fastest ships in the galaxy without being a custom modded ship, and it is nice to see them keeping this Mon Cala aspect, as the Class 2 was more normal for capital ships, especially after the Clone Wars, but the fish folk swam against the norm and most of theirs had Class 1. It is said to have a main reactor that is 20% more than the ISD, peaking above 9.28 times 10 to the 24th watts, and its main shield and backup shields are simply described as increased, which I guess should be expected with being more than a decade newer than the shield gods of the MC80s. And if you think that is incredible, just look at the armament, and I really appreciate how specific the details are on the placement and the crew required to operate each of these guns. Normally the details here are kind of vague. With the MC90, we know that the ship is equipped with heavy turbo laser batteries totaling 75 in number, and these are distributed with a firing arc of 30 front, 15 each to the left, right, and rear, while a crew of 3 is required to operate each of them. And the atmospheric range of these turbo lasers is 150 kilometers, or about 93 miles. Then we have the heavy ion cannon batteries, with a total of 30 to 35 units. The firing arc for these is 10 front, 8 to 10 each at the left and right, and 4 to 5 rear, while these cannons require a crew of 7, and their atmospheric range is 100 kilometers, or 62 miles, while boasting 6 heavy proton torpedoes/missile tubes with a forward fire arc, each tube holding 16 missiles, and the crew required for operation is 15, while the atmospheric range for these torpedoes is 6 kilometers, or just under 4 miles. The ISD had no torpedoes, the Venator only had 4 tubes, no heavy torpedoes, but others in the MC line, like the MC30, had them. These weapons work perfectly with the heavy ion cannons, which lower the shields as quickly as possible, while the heavy torpedoes inflict the most damage as quick as possible. Now the total crew is 5,860 with those 605 gunners, though it could operate with a minimum crew of 1,350 and transport another 1,700 soldiers, which is all comparable with the Venator. Its cargo capacity of 30,000 metric tons is also about average, equal to around 50,000 dewbacks. These thoroughly impressive warships remained the height of Mon Calamari shipbuilding until the arrival of the Mediator-class battle cruiser. Older ships like the Galactic Voyager were kept in reserve and upgraded during the Yuzon Vong War, but by then they functioned more as symbolic assets rather than active, heavy warships. And even though newer Mon Calamari built warships, like the simply named Mon Calamari Heavy Cruiser and the Mediator, dominated the Galactic Alliance Defense Forces by 40 ABY, the MC90 was still regarded as a powerful frontline combat vessel. And this was shown when the Galactic Voyager was used as the flagship of Alliance Supreme Commander Chal Niathal. That's it for its breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, it made its first appearance in Dark Empire 2, way back in 1992. With those really specific details coming from the Jedi Academy sourcebook, Dark Empire sourcebook, the Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, and Starships of the Galaxy. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Subscribe to see more, comment your thoughts, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, if you can blend the positives of a droid fleet, Imperial scale, and Mon Cala craftsmanship, your empire might really reign for 1,000 years. And the Force will be with you. Always.
Sound the alarm! All personnel to their stations!
What's up, MetaNerdz? Doing this for the completionist in me, and I'm sure some of you real Mon Cala fans will still find it interesting. Sadly, there aren't many details on the MC95. Just put up the MC90, and we learned how it was the catalyst for the new class modernization program, which sought to make a new standardized ship series that tried to combine the best aspects of the CIS's fleet using droid brains and crew to automate the process, with the Empire's modular parts and similar ship structures to take full advantages of the economies at the scale of a galaxy-spanning military. That was true in the original canon, or Legends, though it doesn't really clash with what we see in Ahsoka, as the project wasn't completed until 20 ABY, as late as 8 years after the show takes place. So when we see the MC95, it is in 34 and 35 ABY, during the fight with the First Order. You gotta love that the centralized democracy was being protected in the largest part by the Mon Cala fleets, and the MC95 is said to be in service of the Mon Calamari monarchy. Though being sympathetic to the resistance movement, many would come under the leadership of General Leia Organa. Now for specifics, we do get that it is larger than a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer, which would make it the biggest MC line ship by far. As most were maxing out around 1,500 meters, the Resurgent is nearly twice that at 2,915.81 meters, or 1.8 miles, so this would be the largest jump we see in any MC creation, and is on par with the Viscount-class Star Defender, which was 3,000 kilometers. It is really poetic that they go from converting their civic centers, literally buildings, into warships, pull off an underdog win, and don't make the foolish mistake of the New Republic, but take their military very seriously, and vowed that no foreign power would ever show up and bully them again. Something about Mon Cala commanders and ships bigger than Star Destroyers just sits right with me, though I'm sure they were very annoyed that they had to rescue the Republic again. You get your iconic blister pods, which could house everything from weapon systems to shield projectors, and I would think that, like with the Home One, many of these could break away as complete ships and smaller escape pods. We are told its hangars are only these two up front, but given its much larger size, I'm sure it could handle a whole mini fleet, not clamped on like the CR-90 and the MC75, but maybe even inside as it's only 150 meters long. And things like the U-Wing alone were 24 meters and very comfortable in the MC75's hangar. And we get 5 sub-variants. Now, the out-of-universe explanation is that for the 16,000 ships created for the final battle on Exegol, to do this they did a digital kit bash, combining parts of all sorts of models, so some look a bit silly. The A is good, just feels like a Home One and Liberty. The B has these strange fins, but you could think of it all powering some specialized super heavy turbo lasers or ion cannons, like the sniping comparison I made with the Munificent. But these wings towards the front hangars drive me nuts. Imagine the issues you would have trying to get in there. I get that they could act like a barrier, a way to shield the hangar, but it's not worth it. There's a reason we don't see this on other more thought out ships. The C is growing on me, no real complaints, and it hits one of the most important parts of a Mon Cala ship. Not the logical design or stats, but simply that it evokes the watery world of its creators. As one commenter pointed out on the MC75 vid, the fact that it evokes a fish or marine creature is part of why this new canon creation is so loved by fans. And it is a bit on the nares, but it does clearly look like a fish, and is like the MC140 Scythe, which I'll be covering next. The D, on the other hand, looks like Mon Cala Shipyards was using 3D printers to build them, and the file got hacked, or 4 different ships are being built here at once. It fails to have the bridge tower aesthetic done so well with the Quarren builds for the CIS, and you get this wannabe Liberty wing with an odd C9979 sticking out over here, while still having the normal MC bridge up front, and hangars that would incur more pilot deaths than the worst TIE fighter squadron, being almost as forward as possible. And the E slips past critique simply by being boring. Sadly, it does make it a very reasonable ship. You get the odd hangars too, but the large antenna array up top and the big pods on each side make me think that this was more like a recon or support craft that is not supposed to be in combat, and the crew could escape and slip through hyperspace with these pods if they were discovered deep in enemy territory. So if you learned anything or thought this was interesting, please leave a like, subscribe to see more, members get early access to videos, and check out these recommendations, I'm sure you'll like them. The only behind the scenes fact is that the MC95 plays a big role in the actually pretty fun Rise of Resistance ride. But most important of all, remember, there's always a bigger fish ship, and the Force will be with you. Always. What's up, MetaNerdz? This complete breakdown will be of the MC140 Scythe, one of the most controversial designs in the history of the galaxy far, far away. And it is such a strange way to finish off the glorious MC line. Since the MC30, each iteration has done something unique and excelled at the specialized role it took on. From the capital ship assassin of the MC30s to the Home One as the mobile base for the rebellion, they pushed from an Exodus fleet of repurposed underwater buildings to going toe-to-toe with Star Destroyers and becoming the best of ships out there. In canon and legends, the Mon Cala did not fall into complacency with the rise of the New Republic. They continued to improve their military like we saw with the MC85, 90, and later 95, eventually becoming larger than the First Order capital ships. And in the original canon, the Mon Cala ships played an enormous role in defeating the Yuuzhan Vong from 25 to 29 ABY. Around 100 years later, for reasons that are still a bit mysterious, Mon Cala shipyards decided to take the long, oval, bulbous, and iconic designs and add this thing to the same line. Now, most of the great details come from the Essential Guide to Warfare and the Legacy Era Campaign Guide. We learned that the Scythe-class battlecruiser was the backbone of the Galactic Alliance fleet, which replaced the New Republic Defense Fleet, which was itself created from the success of the MC90 generations earlier. A reorganization that was sparked by the sheer scale of destruction caused in the Yuuzhan Vong War. And the main enemy at this time is the faction known as the Fel Empire, around from 45 to 127 ABY. but the Fel also just called themselves the Galactic Empire. Like with the debated actual date of the fall of the Roman Empire, many saw themselves as continuations of it and just called themselves Romans. The Fel Empire folks saw themselves as Imperials, one unbroken line that was just suffering some major setbacks and reorganization, but never actual total defeat. The main role of this ship was to take on the Pelion-class Star Destroyer, but it was only a third of the size of the Fel creation, so at most 833 meters or about half a mile. And since the blade itself seems to be larger than the body, I'd put it at least around 1,000 just in the blade, which makes the structure between the Victory and the Venator. But it was way quicker and more maneuverable than the Pelion. And a misconception I've seen in a lot of places is that all of these weapons are only in the blade section. The Essential Guide to Warfare does make it seem like that, to be fair, but there's other sources that contradict that. In this typo from the Legacy Era Campaign Guide, page 149, I think it's trying to say that it's not just in the blade. Quote, the leading edge of the blade, as well was the leading edge of the ship's main fuselage, contains densely spaced turbolaser batteries and torpedo tubes. Of course, that doesn't make sense. It shouldn't say was, but as. So the blade's edge, as well as the edge of the main body of the ship, are aligned with the weaponry. And this matches those other sources that say most, not all the weapons are in the blade section. The point of this was to create a so-called cross of fire, which again doesn't make sense if the fire is only coming from the blade part, but coming from the sides and the blade to make a cross shape. So the idea is to make a quick, agile ship with the output of a destroyer and use that speed to get in the perfect position and ideally one-shot an Imperial ship, having all the ion weapons fire, disabling the shields, and in the next fraction of a second, the turbolasers and torpedoes would rip through the hull. Not too far from the design idea of the MC30. And since we're talking space warfare, with the right calculations, you can time these volleys so that you have the deadly cross of fire barraging in waves. And we learned that most ships could not withstand this for long. One more confusion I just want to address to make sure everything's clear. The fire is still all concentrating on a single point. It's just coming from a cross-shape point of fire, but it's not landing like a big T-shape impact site. Those weapons include 3 heavy turbolaser batteries, 6 turbolaser batteries, 2 heavy ion cannon batteries, and 40 proton torpedo tubes, with 60 torpedoes in total with 2 tractor beam projectors just for good measure. This is utterly insane, with the MC75 having what was at the time an absurd 12 proton torpedo launchers. The Venator only had 4, and the ISD had none. To have 40 with more actual torpedoes on board than an entire fleet of previous generations, all following up the barrage of heavy ions and heavy turbos, focused on a single point from a maneuverable, smaller capital ship, I think that's all very impressive, and it may explain why they went with this odd blade configuration. It stands out to me that this blade is so odd, especially in the context of the MC line, to think that the fish folk have been the best engineers of this era by far. When something is so odd and obviously critiquable, then we should be humble and wonder if this ship is the only one that looks like this, and the only one with so many explosives in it. Maybe the design followed that function. Perhaps if something went wrong and there was a chain reaction, it could jettison this whole blade section and pop into hyperspace to live to fight another day. And if this was in combat, the hangars would be empty. The crew gunners are of course screwed, but that just comes with the job. And we see at the very bottom of the blade were the hangars for the 3 squadrons of CF-9 starfighters for 36 in total, as well as 4 shuttles and various assault and supply ships. And it also had docking rings for larger craft along the main body. It also had a Class 0.75 hyperdrive, which we only see in this era for ships that are not personally modded craft, with the only exception being the Acclamator with the ridiculous 0.6 class hyperdrive. Its crew was 5,200 with 1,500 troops and could move 18,000 tons of cargo, which is all on par for a ship of this size. Now, just because I explained some of the confusion and gave some reasons that might make the blade make sense, I still don't like this design. I just think it's not as silly as people are making it out to be, and I want the critique to be as accurate as possible. The whole cross of fire focusing on a single point sounds cool, but most ships do this already. A perfectly fine example of this is the very ship it was designed to destroy, the Pelion. It takes the staggered levels of the ISD to an even more extreme level. All of its guns from the sides to especially the ones along this ridge could be concentrated on a single point, and that has been true for most ships out there for millennia. If the fear was that having so many torpedoes on board could lead to a chain reaction, then it's weird that the MC ships are known for having these blister bubble packs and weird protrusions. You would think they could have some external structures that are separated, still staggered and spread all over so that they could focus their fire on a single point, but also with that jettison off technology, then since they would be in separate pods, you have less risk of chain reaction. All 160 torpedoes won't go off at once. And so as for its history, after the catastrophic Yuzong Vong War, the Galactic Alliance began rethinking its naval doctrine. Initially, enormous dreadnoughts like the Star Defender dominated Alliance fleets, resting on their sheer size and firepower. But the financial burden of maintaining such colossal warships eventually led to a strategic pivot. The Defense Force shifted its focus to smaller, more versatile vessels that still retained heavy armament and advanced armor. This shift birthed the Scythe-class battlecruiser, which officially entered service in 92 ABY, and came out alongside the Shawshore-class frigate and Saber-Tooth-class assault vessel. It also inspired the creation of the Tri-Scythe-class frigate, a smaller variant characterized by its triple-blade superstructure, which I'll be covering in the next video. And to the critique of this design, it does somewhat go against the lore because the Scythe class became the backbone of the Galactic Alliance fleet, playing a central role during the Sith Imperial War, which erupted in 127 ABY. They fought valiantly at the Battle of Kamas, one of the defining battles of this war. Despite the Alliance fleet's defeat, with their numerous Scythe-class cruisers, they were able to execute a skillful fighting retreat, preserving a significant portion of the fleet for future resistance efforts. Even after the Galactic Alliance's formal surrender, the Scythe continued to serve under the banner of the Galactic Alliance Remnant. These ships would play a pivotal role in the Battle of Dak, where Admiral Stasi's flagship, the Indomitable, was intentionally sacrificed to cripple the Mon Cala shipyards to deny their use to the Sith Empire. In the aftermath of Dak, surviving Scythe-class cruisers continued their fight against the Sith, providing escort for the stolen Imperius-class Star Destroyer prototype, ensuring its safe passage after its capture. And some would form a key part of Admiral Stasi's joint fleet operations with Emperor Roan's Fel's forces. So the fact that they were so useful to so many different factions proved that this thing must have been very effective, not some Mon Cala mistake. As for behind-the-scenes facts, it was designed by Sean Cook, who made all the ships for the Galactic Alliance and Imperial warships. And the blade section is described as a hammerhead shape, in line with evoking the fish aesthetics of the Mon Cala creations. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions, subscribe to see more, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. Members get early access to videos, but most important of all, remember, just because something's ugly doesn't mean it was a mistake or that it's not useful. And the Force will be with you, always.